8 years. That's how long it took them to send one calendar invite with no subject line. 8 years is a specific thing. It's not a decade, which sounds clean and round and almost impressive. It's not 5 years, which is the number people say when they want to sound committed without sounding like they have been stuck. 8 years is the number you get when you keep saying yes past the point where you should have asked a harder question. You started there at 29. You had a different idea about what loyalty meant back then. You thought it was something that accumulated, like you were building a balance in an account that the company was also keeping track of. Every late night, every weekend you checked Slack from your couch. Every time someone above you needed something turned around fast and you were the one who made it happen, you thought that registered somewhere. You were good at the job. That part was real. You'd kept pace with every shift the industry made, and there were a lot of them in 8 years. When the team moved to a new content management system, you figured it out in a weekend and walked 3 colleagues through it on Monday. When everyone started talking about SEO in a different way, you took a course on your own time and came back with a framework that actually worked. You were the person who knew things, the person people asked. In the spring of your 6th year, a report you wrote got cited in the pitch deck for the company's largest account renewal. Your manager mentioned it in a team meeting briefly and moved on. You remember sitting at your desk after that meeting and thinking, quietly, not saying it out loud, that you were exactly where you were supposed to be. You turned down 2 outside offers in those 8 years. The first one paid more. The second one paid significantly more. Both times you said no because the timing wasn't right, because you were in the middle of something, because you told yourself the place you were building toward was here. You already knew, on some level. You just weren't asking the right questions yet. The first signal came 14 months before the end. You weren't paying attention to it because it didn't look like a signal. It looked like a meeting. Your VP called it an AI strategy session. All hands, calendar blocked for 90 minutes on a Thursday afternoon. You went. Everyone went. There was a deck with a lot of slides about efficiency and the future of work and staying competitive in a changing landscape. There was a guest speaker from a consulting firm who used the word augmentation several times in a row. At the time, you thought it was the kind of meeting companies hold to make people feel included in decisions that have already been made at a different level. You weren't wrong about that part. What you got wrong was thinking the decision that had already been made didn't involve you specifically. The second signal was your manager, Daniel, asking you a question about your workflow. Not a casual question, a thorough one. He wanted to know how you structured a project from brief to final output, what tools you used at each stage, how you handled revisions, how you thought about quality control. He had a notepad. He wrote things down. At the time, you thought he was trying to document processes for the new hire they'd been talking about for months. You answered completely. You gave him everything, the shortcuts you developed, the frameworks you used, the judgment calls that most people couldn't see but that made the final product better. You were helping. You were being a good teammate. What that conversation actually was, a knowledge extraction interview. The notes went somewhere other than an onboarding document. The third signal was a project that got assigned to a junior analyst on your team, a project that would normally come to you. The deadline was aggressive. The brief was thin. You figured they were trying to develop her, give her something to stretch on. You helped her when she had questions. You gave her your frameworks. You thought you were mentoring. You told yourself the business was just changing. You were good at your job. That part was still true. The part you misjudged was thinking that mattered the way it used to. The fourth signal you didn't open. An email with the subject line, Operational Efficiency Review, Q4 Planning. It sat in your inbox for 3 days. Your inbox was always full. You flagged it to read later. The meeting that actually determined what happened to you wasn't any of those. It was a Q3 planning session 6 months before the end. You weren't in the room. You weren't on the invite. Nobody told you it happened. Wednesday, 10:47 in the morning. You were halfway through a first draft when the calendar notification appeared. Meeting in 13 minutes. You assumed it was the weekly check-in that had been moved. You closed the document, got a glass of water, went to the conference room. Your manager, Daniel, was already there. Next to him was a woman from HR, whose name you knew from company-wide emails but had never spoken to directly. Next to her was a man you didn't recognize. His name was on the invite. You'd read it fast and not registered it. His title you'd find out later was Workforce Transition Specialist. There was a folder on the table in front of the empty chair. Closed. Your name was on the tab. Daniel didn't start with small talk. He looked at a sheet of paper, not at you, and said that the company had completed a review of its operational structure and had made the decision to eliminate several roles as part of a technological integration initiative. He said your role was among them. He said the company was grateful for your contributions over the years. He said the transition team was here to walk you through next steps. He used the phrase role elimination due to technological integration, not replacement, not layoff. Elimination due to technological integration. Your phone buzzed on the table, a Slack notification, you didn't look at it. The HR woman slid the folder toward you. Inside was a separation agreement, a summary of your severance package, and an NDA. The NDA was 3 pages. The separation agreement had a signature line at the bottom with a date already printed on it. Yesterday's date. The document had been prepared the day before. That's when the timeline assembled itself clearly for the first time. This conversation was not the decision. The decision had been made weeks ago, maybe months. This conversation was the last administrative step. They had a specialist in the room because they'd done this before, recently enough that they had a specialist available. You asked one question. You asked if this was related to the AI tools the company had been piloting. Daniel looked up from his paper. He said the decision was based on a comprehensive review of operational needs. He looked back down. You'll remember that for a long time. Not what he said, the looking back down. Here's what they don't put in the employee handbook. What happened to you has a name inside corporate planning documents. It's called a workforce transformation process, and it doesn't happen in one meeting. It happens over 6 to 12 months in phases that are designed to be invisible to the people they're happening to. The first phase is knowledge extraction. This is what Daniel's workflow interview was. Companies that are planning to replace a role with AI need to understand exactly how that role is performed, what decisions get made, what judgment gets applied, what the person actually does that isn't in the job description. The best way to get that information is to ask the employee directly, framed as process documentation or team development or something that sounds like it's for the employee's benefit. Most people answer completely. Why wouldn't they? They're being helpful. The second phase is shadow testing. The company runs an AI system on the same tasks you're doing, in parallel, without telling you. They compare output quality and cost. They adjust prompts. They run it again. This phase can last months. You never see it happening because it's happening in a separate workflow you don't have access to. The third phase is the transition. They present the decision as a response to business conditions. They use words like restructuring and integration and elimination. They offer severance in exchange for a signature on an NDA. The NDA isn't just about protecting trade secrets. It's about making sure you don't tell the next person what happened to you in specific enough detail that they'd recognize it when it starts happening to them. They didn't replace you with an AI that came fully formed. They replaced you with an AI that they trained partly on the documentation you provided, the frameworks you explained, the processes you detailed in that 90-minute conversation with your manager. They didn't replace you with AI. They replaced you with a workflow you documented yourself. The AI upskilling workshop the company ran 4 months before the end. The one with the outside facilitator, the one where you did the exercises, the one where you practiced using prompting techniques on real work samples. That workshop wasn't for your benefit. It was the data collection phase. The prompts you wrote that day were used to calibrate the system. You did the homework. You showed up on time. You helped them understand exactly how to replace you. This is not illegal. It's not even unusual anymore. It's a calculation. You were a line in a spreadsheet. The math came out a certain way. Nobody in that room on Wednesday hated you. The person who ran the workforce transformation process probably didn't know your name before the week the folder was prepared. That's not a comfort. It's actually the whole point. You left the building at 11:23 in the morning. It was a Wednesday in October, and the sidewalk outside was full of people doing normal things, getting coffee, walking somewhere, on their phones. None of them knew what had just happened to you. You were carrying a cardboard box with the contents of your desk. It wasn't a big box. 8 years, and it fit in something about the size of a shoebox. Your badge didn't work on the way out. The HR woman had told you that would happen. She'd said it in the same tone she'd used to explain the severance timeline. You held the box while the security guard let you through. He didn't make eye contact. You sat in your car for a while. Not crying, just sitting. The box on the passenger seat. Your laptop was still on your desk. It was company property, they told you. Someone would reach out about return logistics. You'd spent hundreds of hours on that laptop. You had files on there going back to your second year. You hadn't thought about the files until that moment. Marcus texted later that afternoon. Something short. He said he'd heard and he was really sorry. Nothing in the message that could be forwarded. You understood why he wrote it that way. You'd have written it the same way. You signed the NDA on the third day. 10-week severance. You did the math in the parking lot of the place where you went to sign the paperwork. 10 weeks for 8 years works out to about a week and a quarter per year. The first 2 years weren't included in the calculation. Something about the vesting structure of the severance formula. It was in the document. You'd read it twice and still weren't entirely sure you understood it. That evening, you opened LinkedIn to update your profile. You got to the current position field. The cursor blinked in the empty box for a while. You closed the laptop without saving. There's a version of this story where the ending is about AI, about technology, about the future of work. That version exists, and there are people who will tell it to you. They'll have frameworks and predictions and advice about how to adapt. That's not what this story is about. This story is about the fact that you did everything correctly. You learned the new tools, you documented the processes, you stayed current, you were loyal to the point of turning down money twice. You were exactly the kind of employee that companies say they want. The system didn't fail you because you did something wrong. It didn't fail you at all, actually, from the system's perspective. It performed exactly as designed. You were a cost. The cost got optimized. That's the whole story from where the spreadsheet sits. What changes after something like this isn't bitterness. Bitterness would actually be easier. What changes is something quieter. A specific, permanent adjustment in how you read a room. You notice now when a manager asks about your workflow in a little too much detail. You notice when a meeting has a workforce transition specialist in attendance and what that title means. You read the subject line on every email before you decide it can wait. You don't tell people in those rooms that you recognize what's happening. You ask a question instead. You ask it calmly, in the room, while there's still a record of the answer. That's the thing they don't teach you. Not in the onboarding, not in the AI upskilling workshop. A few weeks after the severance ran out, you were at your kitchen table with a new laptop, working on something of your own. You needed to look something up. You opened a browser tab. The search bar was empty. You sat there for a second, and then you typed the question yourself, and you read the answer carefully, and you decided whether it was right.